Good afternoon, everyone. The Subcommittee on Water, Oceans, and Wildlife will now come to order. The subcommittee's meeting today to examine the President's fiscal year 2020 budget, and specifically for the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation and the Water Resources Mission of the U.S. Geological Service. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at this hearing will be limited to the chairman and the ranking member or their designees. This allows us to hear from our witnesses sooner and keeps members on schedule. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they're submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today or the close of hearing, whichever comes first. Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this hearing. The work that's done by these two agencies is incredibly important to our nation's communities and economies. I'm glad that we get to spend some time today with leadership from both agencies. Welcome to our witnesses. The Bureau of Reclamation, of course, is the largest wholesale water supplier in the United States and the nation's second largest producer of hydropower. Reclamation's built infrastructure includes 338 reservoirs, thousands of miles of canal as well that deliver water to tens of millions of people. And the USGS develops and disseminates water data that helps us understand and operate water systems all over the country. This important data is collected from 1.9 million water supply and water quality data collection sites all over the United States. So both Reclamation and USGS obviously do vital work to secure and manage America's water supplies. In the coming years, both agencies will face great challenges to their ability to continue this work for the American people. Reclamation's water managers must contend with aging infrastructure, increasingly frequent and severe drought, and extreme weather events exacerbated by climate change. Meanwhile, USGS must continue to supply our nation with crucial scientific information in the face of a rapidly changing environment across many parts of the country. In some cases, the administration's fiscal year 2020 budget reflects an understanding of these agency responsibilities and the challenges that they face. For example, Reclamation has recommended a 40% increase in funding for facility maintenance and rehabilitation. Happy to see that. Increased funding here is certainly needed to address the agency's multi-billion-dollar backlog of extraordinary and deferred maintenance needs. But in other cases, this budget reflects a jarring disconnect, a dismissal of Reclamation's imperative to adapt to the challenges of increasingly frequent and severe drought. Take, for example, a requested 83% cut to the popular WaterSmart program, including a 95% cut to the Title 16 water reuse and recycling program. The water projects supported by these programs can provide a virtually drought-proof supply for tens of millions of people if they're equipped with sufficient funding, and yet their funding is being slashed to the bone in this budget. I'm also concerned by proposed cuts that would impact tribal and rural water supplies. Reclamation has proposed to keep Indian water settlements funded either flat or in some cases the proposal is to decrease funding. I'd like to hear more today about whether the funding proposed will allow the federal government to meet the terms and the deadlines associated with congressionally authorized settlements. Reclamation's budget also proposes a 79% cut for the design and construction of rural water projects, despite the fact that Reclamation has identified a $1.3 billion backlog for authorized rural water projects. These projects will take decades to complete at the proposed funding level, which is unacceptable. And while the President talks a lot about rebuilding our nation's infrastructure, this budget unfortunately shows a disconnect. The committee hopes to hear why Reclamation thinks it's appropriate to slash funding for infrastructure and 21st century water projects that can help prevent future water shortages for American communities. Other proposed budget items require increased transparency. The Department of Interior's reorganization is factored into the budgets for both Reclamation and USGS, but the budgets are vague in their description of how that money will be spent. This committee's been pressing for details and has not yet received needed information from the administration. Given that USGS has the second largest contribution to reorganization expenses of any interior agency, I hope we can shed some light on that subject today. I also note that funding is being proposed for this ill-defined reorganization while the core work of USGS, data collection, remains deeply underfunded. 10 years ago, Congress set a requirement for USGS to expand its stream gauge network of 4,700 federally owned gauges at important sites by 2019. Well, here we are in 2019. The agency is about 1,000 gauges short of meeting that mandate. Fortunately, the public can rely on thousands more stream gauges that are cooperatively managed by USGS and state and local partners to inform its massive data network. Unfortunately, USGS has also proposed to cut funding for its role in those gauges, leaving our tribal, state, and local partners in the lurch. While the proposed cuts before us today are disappointing, it's important to note that Congress gets the last word on funding levels, and this Congress will have a chance to engage on these issues. Before I close, I want to just say that despite our policy differences, this committee wants to work with Reclamation and USGS to find common ground and manage our water resources responsibly. We've already had one triumph in collaboration earlier this Congress regarding the Colorado River Drought Contingency Plan. I hope we can continue to find common ground on the many important issues under this subcommittee's jurisdiction. And with that, I would like to recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The subcommittee meets today to hear testimony from the Bureau of Reclamation and the U.S. Geological Survey regarding their fiscal year 2020 budget requests of $1.1 billion and $983 million, respectively. Now, not included in the President's budget request, but critically important, is the implementation of the WIN Act Section 4007 Water Storage Authority. The necessity for major expansion of our water storage capacity should now be obvious to everyone. For 5 years, California experienced its worst drought in centuries, draining our reservoirs to near empty and doing enormous economic damage. Over the last several years, we've now seen record rainfall well above historic norms. And indeed, in my district in the Sierra, we're expecting both heavy rain and snow today. The same reservoirs that reached near dead pool levels just a few years ago during the drought now have their floodgates wide open because we have no place to store this surplus water for the next drought. For example, Shasta Reservoir is at 95% of storage capacity. It's releasing 7,000 cubic feet per second simply because we have nowhere to store the water. That water will be desperately missed in the next drought. When Congress passed the WIN Act, it asked Reclamation to recommend projects that expand or build new water storage. Reclamation has slowly provided Congress with recommendations on how best to spend the $335 million that Congress has authorized. In January 2018, Reclamation proposed 7 projects to be listed by Congress for funding. All 7 projects were approved by Congress in the enacted FY 2018 appropriations bill. Included in that list was the Shasta Dam and Reservoir Enlargement Project. By itself, Shasta would create an additional 630,000 acre-feet of stored water. Enlarging the reservoir would improve water supply reliability, reduce flood damage, and improve water temperatures in the Sacramento River below the dam. And lest we forget, Shasta was built to a height of 600 feet, but it was designed for 800 feet. The difference is 9 million acre-feet of additional water storage. At issue now is less than 20 feet of additional height, 630,000 acre-feet of additional storage, just 7% of its additional storage potential. Recently, Reclamation completed a second competitive selection process. Reclamation proposed 7 projects, most of which were previously approved for funding by Congress in 2018. The Shasta Dam and Reservoir Enlargement Project was once again recommended by Reclamation. Now, California is blessed to be one of the most water-rich regions of the country, and we have only ourselves to blame for water shortages. It is a sad commentary on state water policy that amidst this abundance of water resources, Californians are facing permanent restrictions on residential water use. Meanwhile, California officials busy themselves diverting federal Central Valley water to the Pacific Ocean and then squandering enormous amounts of money, $2,000 per acre foot, to reclaim that water once it's been lost to the ocean, and all the while suing to stop any expansion of the federal dam at Shasta. I am most interested in the plans of Reclamation to combat these foolish policies by state officials as they affect federal water projects in the state. And I'd like to raise one other point concerning the financing of these water projects. Water and power should be priced to reflect its actual cost so that every consumer has an accurate price signal to use in assessing their own needs and making their own decisions. That principle should extend to the water projects themselves. They once were and ought to be entirely financed by the consumers of the water and power that they generate in proportion to their use. We should be looking at the cheapest and most efficient possible ways to store water and generate hydroelectricity, and then let prices guide us in the selection and financing of these projects. By these means, consumers can be assured of the lowest prices and therefore the greatest abundance that we can produce while leaving general taxpayers unharmed. It should be self-evident that more water is better than less water. More electricity is better than less electricity. Water and power abundance depends upon obtaining both at the cheapest prices available, and we need to return to those policies. I yield back.
I thank the ranking member. We'll now hear witness testimony. Let me remind our witnesses that under committee rules, they must limit their oral statement to 5 minutes. Of course, your entire written statement will be entered into the hearing record. When you begin, and you all know this, I think, but you will see lights on the witness table that begin by turning green. After 4 minutes, it'll turn yellow, and red means it's time to wind up. I will ask the entire panel, both witnesses on the panel, to testify before we begin questioning for members, and I'll now introduce the witnesses. First, we have the Commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation, Brenda Berman, with us. Welcome, Commissioner Berman. And the chair now recognizes you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Huffman, Ranking Member McClintock, and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to discuss with you the President's fiscal year 2020 budget for the Bureau of Reclamation. Before I begin my remarks on the President's budget request for reclamation, I would first like to thank this committee and its staff for your leadership on the Colorado River Drought Contingency Plan Authorization Act. You did amazing work in a very short amount of time. This is a great accomplishment for farms, cities, states, tribes, and others who depend on the Colorado River. So I thank you. I want to provide some context today for our budget request. The Bureau of Reclamation was established in 1902 by Congress and President Theodore Roosevelt with the signing of the Reclamation Act. The act was signed to encourage settlement in the American West by providing water supply and reliability for farms and communities. Minidoka Dam in 1907, Hoover Dam in 1931, Grand Coulee in 1933, all were built in the early days of reclamation, and yet in 2019, they continue to provide irrigation water, flood control, hydroelectric power, and water supply to western cities. Much of the modern West as we know it would be unimaginable but for the Bureau of Reclamation and its projects. Fast forward to today. Reclamation's fiscal year 2020 budget continues to address water supply challenges in the West and prepare our agencies and water users for 21st century challenges. Our goals are straightforward: ensure water reliability and the efficient generation of energy, modernize our organization and infrastructure, and uphold our commitments to tribal nations and the environment. The 2020 budget prioritizes these functions and supports Reclamation's vital role out West. Our budget emphasizes the following principles. First, water reliability. Reclamation recognizes the importance of maintaining water supplies that can withstand future drought conditions. Moreover, we recognize the importance of securing and modernizing all of our dams and water projects, particularly those that rely on aging infrastructure. As I mentioned in March during the subcommittee hearing on the Colorado River Drought Contingency Plan, we are currently experiencing the worst drought in recorded history in the Colorado River system. And we've put up the hydrology so far this year of the western United States. And you see a lot of wet areas, and this is one of those few years where we're not seeing severe drought in any part of the country. But in some ways that masks what's happening, because on the Colorado system, we have had the driest 19-year period in over 100 years. But we remain, and in many other places, California and others, we have been experiencing severe drought for a number of years. We are committed to protecting and mitigating against the effects of drought. On California, we've also experienced recent water shortfalls. However, the recent heavy rains have caused the opposite challenge, sometimes flooding concerns and flooding out of our system. The cycle of water shortfalls and heavy rains highlight the importance of maintaining reclamation's infrastructure and the need for more storage. Our budget addresses these priorities by allocating funds to most effectively implement our programs and management responsibilities. Second priority, efficient energy generation. As the nation's second largest producer of hydroelectric power, Reclamation's projects and programs continue to strongly support economic growth and opportunity. The maintenance and modernization of this infrastructure remains a high priority for Reclamation. We have requested appropriations for extraordinary maintenance activities to improve the efficiency of our projects. That request supports major, non-reoccurring repairs, replacements, or renovations. Finally, our mission of conservation. Reclamation strives to ensure the future water delivery and power generation through the responsible use and conservation of its resources. Our funding request supports Reclamation's collaboration with non-federal partners and our efforts to promote improved water management and conservation and actions to mitigate the adverse effects and environmental impacts of our projects. At the end of the day, I believe that we as a country face a unique opportunity to advance all of these causes. There are a lot of discussion across the country about the state of our nation's infrastructure. We owe it to ourselves and future generations to continue this investment in infrastructure and our water reliability. The Bureau of Reclamation and this administration remain committed to addressing Western water and energy needs in a responsible and forward-looking fashion. On our way to modernization and water security, 2020 promises to be a critical year with tremendous challenges, but also exciting opportunities. I'd like to thank this committee for allowing us to testify today, and I'm prepared to answer any questions you have related to Reclamation's fiscal year 2020 budget.
Thank you, Commissioner Berman. I thank you for your testimony, and we will now hear from Dr. Klein from the USGS. Welcome, sir. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Huffman, Ranking Member McClintock, and members of the subcommittee, thanks for the invitation to deliver this testimony regarding our FY 2020 budget request for the Water Resources Mission Area of the U.S. Geological Survey. My name is Don Klein, and I'm the Associate Director for the Water Resources Mission Area of the USGS. This mission area is comprised of more than 3,700 employees in almost 200 locations across the United States. And I'm proud to be here on behalf of all the work they do every day for the nation. The overall 2020 budget request for the USGS is $983.5 million. It advances several department priorities by supporting strategic investments in research, assessments, mapping, and land imaging. The 2020 budget request for the Water Resources Mission Area is about $180 million, which includes a total of $57.7 million in cooperative matching funds. The USGS Water Resources Mission Area monitors and assesses the amount and characteristics of the nation's water resources, assesses sources and behaviors of contaminants in the water environment, and develops tools to improve management and understanding of water resources. In 2020, the Water Resources Mission Area will focus on 4 things: delivering integrated water availability assessments, or IWAS, at national and regional scales, upgrading the USGS water observing systems to better couple USGS data with the National Water Model and other advanced modeling tools, modernizing the National Water Information System, or NWIS, and building prediction capabilities for water quality. In addition, the budget proposes a restructure of the Water Resources Mission Area to achieve more integrated observation, understanding, prediction, and delivery of water science information to the nation. The mission area would be divided into 2 programs: the Water Observing Systems Program and the Water Resources Availability Program. The Water Observing Systems Program, or WASP, encompasses the Water Resources Mission Area's objectives to collect, manage, and disseminate consistently high quality and reliable water information in real time and over the long term. In addition to maintaining the National Stream Flow Network, the National Water Quality Network for streams and rivers, the Climate Response Network, and the Groundwater Quality Monitoring Network, the WASP would continue efforts to enhance monitoring network infrastructure. This enhancement would initially be focused on two areas. First, the Delaware River Basin as a pilot watershed for implementing the USGS Next Generation Water Observing System. And second, along U.S. coastlines as the USGS continues installation of equipment to facilitate more efficient instrument deployment prior to major storms and tsunamis. The Water Resources Availability Program, or WRAP, fulfills the goals established by Congress in the Secure Water Act by investing in research and assessments that improve the nation's understanding of water availability. In 2020, the WRAP would deliver a near real-time census of water quantity as part of the National Integrated Water Availability Assessment, or IWA. At the regional scale, the USGS will continue work on a regional IWA pilot in the Delaware River Basin, evaluating the impact of severe drought under current water supply and demand restrictions. This pilot, leveraging the enhanced water data collection through the Next Generation Water Observing System pilot, will serve as a proof of concept and will help to refine the regional IWA framework for future pilot basins. In addition, the WRAP will continue work focused on understanding the factors that influence both the quantity and the quality of water available for human and ecological uses. For example, the USGS will continue studies that examine the processes and water quality conditions that precipitate harmful algal blooms, or HABs. Fundamental to all this work will be USGS efforts to develop comprehensive and consistent hydrologic modeling frameworks for the nation. In 2020, the USGS will continue to collaborate with partners to develop and improve national scale prediction capabilities for hydrologic characteristics and processes. On behalf of the USGS, I thank the committee for its interest in USGS water programs and appreciate the opportunity to testify today. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Klein. I'd like to remind members that Committee Rule 3D imposes a 5-minute limit on questions, and the chair will now recognize members for any questions they may wish to ask the witnesses. I'll start by recognizing Mr. Costa for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, for this important hearing. I'm going to, in written form, submit my suggestions as it relates to the budget appropriations and focus my questions on some of the policy issues. Let us begin with limited time. I want to talk about the allocation issues in California. I want to talk about the unimpaired flows. I'd like to ask some questions with regards to title transfer issues with regards to the Bureau. And let's start with the allocations. As was noted before, and I said yesterday, we've got a very good, blessed year with 176% of above average snowpack in the Sierra. And most of the districts that the Bureau serves are at 100% allocation in the Sacramento Valley and on the Front Water Users, the exchange contractors. But on the San Luis unit, we are at 65%. And I know that there are issues there, and I'm well aware of all of the issues. I just don't understand, Commissioner, if at 76% of normal, we can't get 100% for the San Luis water unit. When can we ever expect to? I mean, I understand the strains on the system at average or below average or drought conditions, but 176% of normal, could you please explain, and is that going to be changed at all here in the next few weeks? Water allocated in July, sadly, really cannot be effectively and efficiently used as it relates to the crops in the farm communities.
Thank you, Congressman. At Reclamation, we work very hard every year to deliver a full supply of water to
No, I know that.
Every year is different.
I know that.
There are so many factors that go into it. In this
I know that.
year, south of Delta, we were able to get to 80% for our M&I contractors, and we're at 65% for the other water service contractors. We are constantly updating our analysis.
I know that, and you're conferring with the state.
There's a cold storm coming in. And
Yes, as we speak, rain and snow.
We'll be watching that
The
storm
middle of May.
to see if there's any
Are
changes.
you going to make a decision this week?
We will have to see what that storm produces and what the changes are.
You know, I want to get to my other questions, but frankly, this is, the system's broke for a lot of different reasons. And it's just not satisfactory. 65% for some of the poorest farm communities in the valley. Let me move to the issue of the unimpaired flows. The state water boards come out with efforts that many of us disagree with. What does the Bureau want to do with regards to its efforts on these voluntary settlement agreements? Be brief, please.
We are working with the state and
I know that.
the transition of the new state on voluntary agreements. And so Ernest Conant, who is our regional director,
Yes.
has taken lead on that. And I'm very hopeful. I do not think what the state board has proposed currently is
I
workable
agree
in
with you.
California. So we are working closely with the state. We're working closely with contractors in both the state and
I
federal
mean,
side.
it's juxtaposed with SGMA, which is a very important historic law to get our groundwater in balance, which we must do, but then to take unimpaired flows that I don't think are objective in nature and I don't believe will improve the fisheries, all this in context of climate change and sea level rising that make it job more difficult, and then to get our groundwater in balance, which we must do. It's certainly contradictory, I think.
I'm hopeful that clearer minds will prevail. There's a lot of people working very hard.
I've been doing this for 39 years. I hope clear minds will prevail as well, and that we cooperate and that we don't make villains out of certain regions of the state for their water use. Let me finally end up on something that you've done, maybe you can answer. Contra Costa Water District recently was transferred title by the Bureau to their conveyance facility. We have other federal projects like that that you own. The Friant-Kern Canal is one of these areas that we must make the repairs. Would the Bureau be willing to consider transferring title, as you did with Contra Costa Water District, the Friant-Kern Canal, so that Congressman Cox and I and others who want to repair that, and it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars, that they could then borrow against it and take precedent of previous action?
At the Reclamation, we've always been open to working with parties to transfer works that can be managed better at a local level. The best thing we can do is work with the local office, and I believe they're already doing that, to see what are the possibilities there.
So yes is the answer.
Yes, we'll absolutely be working with you to see if that's possible.
All right, thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes Ranking Member McClintock for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Commissioner Berman, several months ago, Reclamation sent a strongly worded letter to the state of California threatening to sue the state if it proceeded with its unimpaired flow plan. Reclamation eventually filed that lawsuit, and in the interim, the state needs to sign off from the EPA in order to proceed with their plan, and has submitted their plan to the EPA. The EPA has until June to sign off on the state's plans. To what extent has Reclamation coordinated with the EPA with regard to Reclamation's lawsuit?
First, Congressman, I signed that letter, and we certainly did recommend to the Department of Justice, and they filed suit in March. We've had a lot of coordination with our different sister departments at a lot of different levels. That has really been the lead of Tim Petty, trying to get the departments to work better together. They're calling it the Water Sub-Cabinet. So we would meet monthly with EPA, with Department of Ag, with Army Corps of Engineers, with others, and we're able to talk about a number of subjects. So we do coordinate with EPA and with Department of Ag and others on all of these subjects facing us.
Thank you. In October of 2018, the President signed a memorandum promoting the reliable supply and delivery of water in the West. Earlier this year, Reclamation released the biological assessment for the reinitiation of consultation on the coordinated long-term operation of the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project. This document was transmitted to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, National Marine Fisheries Service, for consideration in developing new biological opinions covering the CVP and SWP operations. To what extent is Reclamation coordinated with the National Marine Fisheries Service to ensure that a new biological opinion avoids any jeopardy or timing issues?
Congressman, we are right in the heart of it. Everyone is working very closely together on trying to move forward new biological opinions, and we are very cognizant that those need to be done before the new water year. So we are working with NIMS and Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as our contractors, the state. Everybody is working very closely to move together to come to new biological opinions that reflect the hundreds of millions of dollars that have been spent on science and the new information that we've and have built up over the last 10 years.
And how do you anticipate this will affect water supply in California?
If you look at our proposed action and the biological assessment, it is certainly our hope that we will be improving water supply for both the federal project and for the state project.
In my opening remarks, I mentioned the importance of the Shasta Dam, 630,000 acre-feet of additional water storage. It seems to me to be the most shovel-ready project in California, yet unfortunately this week, officials in California sued to stop the project. Reclamation's requested over $50 million for Shasta this year. If Congress fails to appropriate that money, how would this affect the project, and if appropriated, is that money for actual construction?
In the recommendation that Reclamation made to Congress for WIN Act funding, part of that funding was to finish up final design and pre-construction activity, and part of it was to move to construction. Shasta Dam is, as far as the storage studies that we know about, is the one that is closest and ready to move to construction. It is also the most cost-effective project that we've seen in California.
Thank you. Finally, the state of California announced recently it'll be undertaking its own state environmental review of state project operations, quite separate from the coordinated operations plan done in 2008. Do you feel this effort benefits the federal CVP in any way?
I'm sorry.
The announcement by California that it was going to do its own state environmental review of state project operations on the CVP, what do you anticipate out of that?
So we've been working with the state, and they've told us so far that their actions will not hold back the calendar, that they have designed their CEQA that has to happen first, and then they would move to their permit, is designed to finish at the end of the year at the exact same time as ours.
That's what they've told you.
That's what they've told us.
Do you believe it?
I know they're working hard, and I think at this
Well,
point...
they're working hard to stop projects. That's been very clear for many years.
I am hopeful that the projects will finish together as far as, and be ready for the new water year.
Thank you.
And I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Commissioner Berman, Reclamation submitted recommendations to Congress in February this year for WIN Act storage project funding, and I'm wondering how the Bureau decided what amount of funding should be recommended for each project.
So we went through a grassroots process of kind of when WIN passed, and we followed this since then, is putting out a call to the regions, and they put out a call to the area offices. What looks like it's ready or would qualify for these projects under WIN, and there, are different qualifications under WIN.
Based on feedback that you got from the region.
Right.
I ask that because the bulk of the storage money, $57 million, goes under your proposal to the enlargement of Shasta Dam, a project that the state of California actually is on record opposing. The Attorney General filed suit to stop you from building it this week. So it raises a number of issues. I wish it were a project that was actually paid for by the beneficiaries. As Mr. McClintock hinted in his opening remarks, less than half of that project would actually be paid for by beneficiaries. The rest is public subsidies. And it happens to be a project that benefits your boss, David Bernhardt's former client, primarily. So there's lots of issues here. And I guess I'm wondering, first of all, can you think of a single project in the history of the Bureau of Reclamation that was built over the opposition of the state in which the project existed?
I can. That would be Arizona and Parker Dam.
So that Arizona actually filed suit to stop?
They did, and that was because they were concerned that California would be taking up
and that's right, you have Arizona history. So interestingly, was that project illegal under Arizona law because you have a specific California law that says you can't build this project, and that's why California is suing?
I think there are a number of different opinions, and we've talked about this before, about what that state law says. What I would say on the Shasta project
It says the McLeod River is a wild and scenic river that can't be impaired by a dam.
What I would say is we will continue to work under our authorities and our funding to move forward to make sure that Shasta is ready.
And so let's talk about those authorities. Do you believe that the WIN Act gives you the authorization to actually construct the Shasta Dam raise?
I believe Congress has told us to move forward and to get Shasta ready, in the same way that
But
Congress...
my specific question is, do you think the WIN Act gives you the authorization to actually build it?
I think there's a lot of different interpretations out there.
I'm asking for yours. You're proposing $57 million to start building this project, so
I think if, in our recommendation, it says $57 million. It says how much would go towards pre-construction activities, how much would go towards construction. If Congress was to move forward and say that $57 million should be spent for the purposes that were sent up, then yes, I would
Okay.
think Congress would be
So
telling
I
us to
think what I'm
construct.
hearing you, I want to be very careful about this, Commissioner Rimmon. I think what I'm hearing you say is you would need additional direction from Congress along with that appropriation to move forward with construction. Did I hear you correctly?
I'm not going to make legal interpretations here.
But this is really important. I mean, there's
I-
actually pending litigation about this.
I agree it's important, but I also think it's something that the department should talk about, but I can go back to the department
Okay.
and we can talk about
What
it.
I'm not hearing you say is that you think there is existing congressional authorization to start building this project.
What I'm saying is that Congress has told us to move forward with WIN Act in the past, and you've told us to study Shasta in the past.
And you also are surely aware that in the fiscal 18 omnibus conference report, there was language that specifically said you got to comply with state law, which you have not done.
I would disagree. At this point, we are moving forward with design. We are moving forward with core studies on the dam to make sure that
Yeah.
everything can move forward.
Certainly, the
That's
design
dam.
didn't violate, but if you were you to move forward with construction, you acknowledge that would violate state law, right?
Pardon me?
You agree that would violate state law were you to try to move forward with construction?
I don't agree with that.
You do not, so what is the authority under which you would be able to construct notwithstanding California's Wild and Scenic Rivers Act?
I think it remains to be seen what the authorities are, and
So
we
you-
know our federal authorities.
You're not citing any specific authority. It sounds like you're
I
just
think
not
there
sure.
are different interpretations of that state law, and I think there may be different interpretations of what our federal authorities are.
So speaking of federal authorities, do you believe that Reclamation has to comply with state water laws?
Yeah, according to the terms of the 1902 Act,
Right.
And-
And that's been the policy for over a century.
and the court interpretations that have come with that over the last 115 years, yes.
If the state of California reaches an endangered species opinion that is more restrictive than what you reach as part of your reconsultation, what will you do?
I would not defer, I would be talking to the department about that. But I would cite as an example right now that the Central Valley Project operates under the federal ESA. It does not operate under the state ESA.
You don't believe it has to comply with the state ESA?
I would say that we would work with the department. If you're asking a specific question, I could work with the department to get you a specific answer.
Very good. My time has expired. The chair now recognizes Mr. Cox for 5 minutes. Or was Mr. Cox? Mr. Cox is next, yeah.
Thank you so much, Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner Berman and Dr. Klein, for your appearing today. I wanted to get back to the question that Mr. Costa was asking about the CVP allocations, and he didn't really give you a chance to elucidate and provide some of the nuances about this year. We're at 176% of snowpack and a 65% allocation. So some simple extrapolation would get to get 100% allocation, we need 270% of annual snowpack, and that would be very difficult to do. So the simple question is, what are the factors that prohibit the Bureau from setting a higher allocation, and what steps is the department taking to ensure that future years like this result in the highest possible allocation? As we know that the surface water supplies directly impacts the communities and the reliability and availability of clean, fresh drinking water to the communities in my district.
Congressman, we are working very hard to improve the water reliability of Californians in the Central Valley Project. And on this year's allocation, I agree, it is very frustrating. But when we look at all the factors that we look at, which include hydrology and storage, and what we see in the system, and the regulatory limitations and physical limitations of the system, at this point we're at 65, but we are always looking for new information and analyzing what comes in. I would say this year one of the major factors has been what's called the IE ratio. It's something that is in the 2009 biological opinion. We are in reconsultation right now. There's a lot of belief and science to say that limitation is probably unfounded. It was an idea back in 2008 and 2009, but we've learned a lot more since then. If that had already happened, then the allocation would be much higher.
Great, thanks so much. And one of the things that I do want to call attention to, and it's of keen interest to me, is the Reclamation Fund. And as you know, it's set up to provide funding for reclamation projects in the 17 western states and funded by royalties from, natural resource extraction, electrical generation, fees on water users. And from what I understand, there's a $17 billion surplus in the fund right now, and it's on track to keep growing. And certainly in the San Joaquin Valley and all over the West, we have this huge need for repairs and upgrades to the existing water infrastructure for storage and conveyance. And it would seem like the $17 billion is sitting there for that particular purpose. And how can our local communities in these projects get access to this money that certainly seems to have been provided to set aside, for these types of projects? And given these existing funding constraints across the West, do you think there's accessing the fund would be useful to help the Bureau address the infrastructure needs of all of our reclamation states?
The Reclamation Fund is always a very interesting issue. I mean, it was created by Congress for the purpose of being a rotating fund as beneficiaries paid back their project costs that would go into the fund and in turn could be lent to other parties. I would say that Congress usually this is just my own observation, every several years takes a look at the Reclamation Fund and what could be possible with it. And there have been times in the past where that's moved forward. But I think what you would see from an administrative point of view is, even though it is a separate fund, it is part of the Treasury. So it's almost like you have, your Christmas fund in your bank account. If you take out funding from the bank account, you are taking out money from the Treasury, which does have the same effects of taking out the money from the Treasury in other places. So the Reclamation Fund is very intriguing, and we would work with you and with Congress to provide more information about it, to talk about the ideas that have been used in the past to access the Reclamation Fund.
Well, thanks very much. In fact, I think we will be convening, and if you would mind coming back for a little subcommittee hearing on that with regard to the Oversight Committee that I chair. I'd love to do that. We do have a little bit of time left, and I just wanted to give Dr. Klein a shout out in that earlier on in my engineering career, I had a chance to spend about a month at a USGS camp in Saudi Arabia, of all places. And the hospitality that was shown, although that we're eating MREs for a month, it was a fantastic time. So thanks for all the good work that's performed by the USGS.
Thank you, sir.
And with that.
All right, very good. The chair now recognizes Mr. Lowenthal for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members of the panel. Commissioner Berman, Southern California has been a leader in innovative water management, and I often hear from my managers that these innovative projects that have grown the water supplies, that have helped them create recycling of all of our water, especially in Orange County, and promoting desalination would never have occurred without federal support. Unfortunately, this administration's budget, or the proposed budget, proposes slashing the Water Smart budget by over 80%, and that budget is one that has taken a $940 million in federal funds and has leveraged then over $3 billion in non-federal cost share for innovative projects. So for my part of the world and the country, very, very important. I want to ask you, how do you think an 83% cut to the Water Smart program is going to impact cities, farms, vulnerable communities that could grow and greatly benefit from additional Water Smart projects? Do you think that this is an appropriate way to go, to cut 83% from the Water Smart budget?
First, I'd agree with you that the Water Smart program has been very successful. We think that the Water Smart program, combined with the other programs within Reclamation, Title 16, others, have been able to either create new supplies or save water supplies, over 800,000 acre feet in the last several years. So they're important programs, and I know they have a lot of support. In times of limited budgets, which is what we find ourselves in, we have to do what's mandatory first. We have to do what has been told by Congress you have to do. And for us, that's operation and maintenance of our existing projects and our existing infrastructure. After that, it's making sure things are going to run, that extraordinary maintenance. Are we okay? Looking at our dam safety, making sure that we make our commitments to our tribal nations. So I would say the Water Smart program is a great program. We are very proud of it. We're very proud of how it's run. We're very proud of the outreach we do to make sure that lots of people are able to access that program. But it is not mandatory. It is discretionary, and so it comes
Well,
at the
let
end.
me go on. You're talking about the importance of it, but then you say you're limited to kind of maintenance. And I remember in your testimony, you mentioned that about 50% of the Reclamation's dams were built between 1900 and 1950. Over 90% were built before the adoption of modern construction. That means that 90% was built before there was a recognized need to consider climate change. Are you now considering the effects of climate change on new construction and maintenance?
We take climate change into effect on all of our projects. We did that back when I was part of the Bureau of Reclamation 12 years ago, and we were just learning how to react to these sorts of things. But Reclamation has had its own regulation rule for itself and how it looks at these projects since 2015. We also have a science advisor who reviews all projects moving forward.
Let me just interrupt then, because I only have a little bit over a minute. How come in your testimony you did not mention the word climate change once then, which for many of us is the most impending and the largest crisis facing us? You never mentioned it. You're saying you take it into account now,
We
but
do.
not once did we hear the word climate change in your testimony.
What I can say is that you asked a question, and climate change has been part of what we look at in projects for a
So
number
you
of
now
years.
say that the Bureau of Reclamation and its infrastructure is vulnerable to climate change, and you will take climate change into account in on all maintenance and new construction.
So climate change is one of many factors.
I just
we
want to
look
hear, I'm
at
not
during
asking about
projects.
other factors. I'm saying, will you state right now that that's a critical factor?
Climate change is one of the factors we look at when we are looking at new projects and rehabilitation of existing projects.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Gonzalez-Colon for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Glenn, for being here today and help us out understand how we're going to use the budget for the next season. In my case, I will focus on what happened in Puerto Rico. And the reason for that is that I know the Geological Survey measures water level and related stream flow through the network of stream gauges located in every state, DC, Guam, Puerto Rico, as well. That data from the stream gauging network is vital for real-time decision-making in terms of long-term planning on issues of water management, infrastructure design, water science research, flood mapping and forecasting, and water quality. And of course, all of those issues are of main importance in Puerto Rico. And as you know, a critical application of this stream gauging network data is being used to safeguard communities from natural hazards, including hurricanes. So, however, it's my understanding that in 2017, the hurricane season damaged or destroyed more than 200 stream gauges including 84 in Puerto Rico. In response for that, the last Congress approved $4.6 billion in the bipartisan budget for repair, replace, and restore of these stream gauges and recover their data, and for hydrologists to reconstruct stream channel measurement. Can you tell me how this budget will seek to strengthen this network so it will be better equipped to withstand storms or other natural disasters, specifically in hurricane-prone jurisdictions like Puerto Rico and Florida?
Thank you for your question, Congresswoman. Yes, we did have a lot of damage during those hurricanes, and we have repaired almost all of the gauges that were damaged from that. In the 2020 budget, we have a request to strengthen our mobile network, what we call rapid deployable gauges, and storm tide sensors. Storm tide sensors are important for engineering studies to build better prediction capabilities and also to understand risk of flooding due to hurricane and storm surges.
And I do understand, reading your statement, that you're looking for include in the 2020 budget the deployed housing sensor for Puerto Rico, the West Coast, and Hawaii.
We have completed Puerto Rico and the Atlantic.
So all our sensors are being repaired already, the 84 of them?
Okay, so the rapid deployable gauges, we have deployed those, or we have set up housings that allow for rapid deployment in the full Atlantic coast, Puerto Rico, and the Gulf Coast. So the budget request extends that into strategic locations in the West Coast and Hawaii. As for stream gauges, 84, I believe, were damaged or destroyed during the hurricanes in Puerto Rico. 83 of those have been repaired. There is one that's awaiting repairs from the electric company to a canal before we can go in and fix that gauge.
Let me know if I can help in that regard. I think this is really important to have this. I mean, every time we got and actually we have it after the hurricane, it was something happening in the Panama area, and our sensors were saying there was a tsunami alert in Puerto Rico when there was no one at that time. So I do know the importance of this, the use of this technology. Can your office provide us an estimate of how many storm sensors housing Geological Service plans to deploy in Puerto Rico in 2020, as it's allowed in the agency budget document?
So we will have 20 storm surge housings. Let me explain what we actually do. We go out just before the storm and insert a sensor into the housing. The housings are mounted ahead of time and surveyed in, so we know the location and those sorts of things. And then we go out just before the storm and insert a sensor, and then we retrieve that sensor immediately after the storm. We'll have the capacity to do that in 20 locations in Puerto Rico on the north, south, and east coasts.
I want to thank you for that. You know, as being the only member representing Puerto Rico here and having been hit by both hurricanes and knowing that the next hurricane season is just right there, for us it's really important to continue to have the deployment of this technology. And I actually thank you for repairing all those 83 units that were damaged or destroyed on the island. I think that was rapidly made, and I just want to commend the work of your agency on that. With that, I yield back the balance of it, and actually, no time.
All right, the chair now recognizes Mr. Cunningham for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank both of you for coming and attending this hearing, and I would yield back my time to the chair.
Well, I thank the gentleman. I'll take that time, and I have a few follow-up questions. So, Commissioner Berman, I want to ask you about an unusual accounting scheme that the GAO has been investigating. It involved the planning process for the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, and in September of 2017, Interior's Inspector General found that Reclamation had been improperly subsidizing that planning process This was an improper accounting scheme that actually inured to the benefit of the Westlands Water District by tens of millions of dollars. And now, at the request of Chairman Grijalva and I, the GAO is conducting an investigation. We are informed that they have sought information from the administration, from your agency and Interior, and that they're not getting that information. And so I wanted to ask you directly if you would direct your staff to cooperate with this investigation.
I just saw your letter last week, Mr. Chairman, and I hadn't known that there were requests to the GAO. I will say on that OIG study that was done of actions that were taken in the last administration, there were some conclusions we didn't agree with, some we agreed with. I think the one we certainly agreed with was that it needs to be more transparent how money is spent in reclamation. And we've taken actions to make sure that that happens. As far as working with the GAO, we will move forward to work with the GAO.
Well, the transparency going forward is great, but in the meantime, your boss, the Interior Secretary's former client, is sitting on tens of millions of dollars in the form of the windfall of federal subsidies that shouldn't have been provided for that planning process. And so I think there's also an interest in understanding, is that money going to be paid back?
So in looking at the OIG study, how the department responded, and I'm not the expert here, but that we do have the authority to spend funding on planning for new projects and for parts of new projects.
So you disagree with the OIG that you think the funding was all above board and proper?
The response to the OIG can be shared, but the response to the OIG was to not concur with certain conclusions, but to concur that there is more need for transparency.
Okay. I'm not hearing you answer specifically whether you will provide the requested information of the GAO, though.
We will cooperate with the GAO.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Now, I want to go back to this issue of state law. I heard you acknowledge that reclamation has to comply with the laws of the states, the water laws, and other state laws. Of course, that's not just the 1902 Act, but the Central Valley Project Improvement Act makes very clear that you have to comply with all obligations under state law as well. But then when we talked about the California Endangered Species Act and the fact that the state of California is going to be seeking its own permit, and that permit may well be more restrictive than the permit that emerges from your current reconsultation under the Federal Endangered Species Act, I got a little confused because I think I heard you say our project operates under the federal ESA as if that somehow meant you don't have to get a CISA permit under California law. Can you clarify that for me, please?
It's my understanding that the Central Valley Project does not seek a CISA permit. But I'm not the expert on this, so I would say that we'd be happy to come in and talk to you about the subject.
Well, I definitely want to talk to you, but we're talking about it right now. Do you acknowledge that at a minimum you need a consistency determination?
I believe the State Water Project needs a consistency determination to move forward.
So the state would not have, when you get your new ESA permit, if that ever happens, you don't think the state has to sign off on that under CISA?
I believe the state is, in the 2008 and 2009 biological opinions, the state sought and received a consistency determination.
Right. The
They've
two
decided to go
permits
about it
were
a different
aligned
way
in
this
that
time.
case. I guess I'm asking about the situation where the state permit is more restrictive than the federal. You've said the project has to comply with state law. Why would you not have to meet the higher standards under the California Endangered Species Act?
I believe what I said was that the Reclamation Act of 1902 says that you seek your water rights under state law. And there's been lots of court decisions.
The
over
CVPIA
last
also says you have to
115
comply with all obligations under
And the
state.
1986 Act has some different, has some further direction on that. But like I said, I'm not trying to make any
Okay.
conclusive legal statements for the project right now.
Great. Well, I will appreciate as much specificity as you can provide. I don't think there's any other members with questions, and so I want to. Yes.
If I may ask for unanimous consent, the issue came up over whether federal government had proceeded with water projects against states' will in the past. I believe that California sued to stop the new Malones Dam and went to court on the same issues the chairman raised and lost. And I'd like to submit that to record for the record, California v. United States, 1970.
Let's get that in the record without objection, because that's not what that case says, but we'll have it in the record for everybody to see. All right, hearing no objection, it is so ordered. And the members of the committee may have some additional questions for witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing under Committee Rule 3.0. Members of the committee must submit those questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the record will be held open for 10 business days for responses. If there's no further business, this committee is adjourned. Thank you.